Hi, I'm Evan Farbstein from PinMe2, and this is Let's Talk Local. Today, we'll be talking about social media strategy with Josh Hood. Josh, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'll let you introduce yourself. Can you give a brief intro about yourself to our listeners who might not know you already?
Thanks, Evan. So my name is Josh. I am social strategist at Above+Beyond. We are kind of a creative agency working from predominantly London, and we work on social media strategies all the way through across multi-channel, from Facebook all the way through to TikTok now. And we have a variety of different clients that we work on either on a project basis or as an always online daily social account.
Right on. And yes, we're recording this interview. It's mid-January right now. And I have just started to see in my Facebook feed these pictures of people getting their COVID vaccinations. So that is starting, but we are a long way from being through this. And so the first question I want to start off with was, I wanted to ask if you could tell us a bit about how you've been adapting your social media strategies since COVID, and especially for brands that have like an online to offline customer journey where eventually they're hoping the customer will come into the store. How do you change your strategies during COVID for that?
So it's been obviously a hugely challenging year for everyone across multiple different industries. From a social point of view, it's been really interesting to understand how the audiences on the platforms themselves have changed in the way that they engage with content over the course of, from March through to now in January 2021. It's been really interesting for us experimenting with those different audiences for different clients. Originally, it was really about getting for a lot of our clients, reopening message out there to tell their audiences that, for example, some of one of the brands that we work on is Subway, and working with them to tell the UK and Ireland audience that we were back open and that we were ready for business and that we were here for them in all the work that the franchise owners were doing across their local communities throughout the original lockdown period in the UK. So there was a lot of different messaging that we were trying to get across. And from a strategic point of view, that meant that we had to be quite tactical in terms of when we drove certain types of those messages to make sure that they weren't overreaching on different parts, and making sure that the customers and audiences were aware of the right message at the right time, especially when everyone was at home. And so obviously social was playing a much bigger part of people's lives with a fewer kind of media opportunities for brands to engage their audiences with. One of the things that we found with that is there were some big changes to audience behavior, and a lot of that was dictated actually by the change from working in offices to working from home, alongside the emergence and certainly for me, mass use of TikTok throughout the year, as we were sat around all day in between meetings or just taking 5 minutes to sit on the sofa behind me. You end up immersed in TikTok as an app because of the way it's built and the sound on nature. And that had a massive effect. And we saw from videos that we were running, there tended to be a lot more kind of like click to play on the video. And that was indicating to us, well, hold on, maybe we need to add more sound or add more dynamic music to the videos that we're making and the content that goes out, because people are more likely to have their phones on full sound rather than being in an office where you're trying not to be caught out all the time with when you're scrolling through your phone. So there were some really interesting behaviors that was dictated by the different environment that people were in and app usage in general.
That's fascinating. I had never thought of that. And I, personally, I actually don't have TikTok. And that's not to say that I don't take breaks when I'm working from home, but and have other time distracting strategies. But I don't use TikTok, and I hadn't known that. So it'll actually automatically start with the audio playing when you're scrolling through your TikTok feed.
Yeah. So TikTok itself is a sound on platform. It automatically plays. Sometimes a bit loud, depending on whether you've forgotten to change that on your phone. But yeah, and obviously that flowed through to other platforms like Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, where we were suddenly changing the ads that we were running and the audio that we were putting on behind it to kind of help tell the story, rather than traditionally you'd kind of just think, well, it's a 6-second ad. We don't need to spend a huge amount of time finding the right audio to go along with it. We just need a kind of quick backing track, or even just leave it sound off if it's directly driving through to as a traffic-based ad. Mm-hmm. So it changed a lot, and it changed the content that we ran and the thought process into some of the content that we came up for what we call business as usual on the monthly content calendars. We were starting to play around with sounds as a way to kind of create content. Like we ran a guess the sub competition post over the course of a couple of weeks in summer, where, you know, similar to how certainly on radio you will have, can you guess what the sound is from you know, whether it's a shoelace being pulled out of the hole it goes in the shoe, or anything. And so we thought, what if we did that with the sub, where, you know, people had to guess what ingredients were in the Subway sandwich based on the sound it made when someone crunched into it. Oh, wow. It was that sort of thing that was like, we would never have thought of doing something like that until we kind of saw those changes in user behavior and people being more into sound content.
That's incredible. And were you able to, like, did you try it yourself? Were you able to tell a meatball marinara apart from an Italian BMT based on the sound?
We were able to. Things we found out was actually having more the lettuce and onions and stuff like that in there was obviously making a big change because they're quite crunchy. So we were teasing our creative director to kind of be like, okay, you've got to make it easier for us. The fewer fillings. It's too crunchy.
Oh, that sounds really fun. Yeah, so that leads in well to another thing I want to talk about, which was about this how to decide which content goes out on which platforms. And you know, you just got into why audio forward stuff can be on TikTok. But I'm wondering how like, first of all, are you basing certain things, saying like, okay, this will go out on Facebook but not TikTok, and this will go out on Twitter but not Facebook, and if you're doing that, and then also how do you decide what kind of stuff goes out on which kind of platform?
Yeah, so we tend to kind of look at it as if the platforms are the most important thing. So we don't kind of make content and be like, well, this is just going to sit on all of them. We try and be thinking platform first, because then you're kind of getting in the head of thinking audience first at the beginning as well, because you have to think about what's right for the audience on the platform to then the content. So we kind of work back from there. So every piece of content will sit on the place that the audience will engage with it most. And that's, so for example, if we come up with some statics, for example, and have a shoot for it, we're already thinking that's going to be Instagram led, because we found that audiences tend to engage a lot more with the kind of static posts that we run for a lot of our clients. And that's just based on the opportunities to engage, rather than it's simplifying the journey for audiences, where instead of having to watch something and then engage with it, it's just, you get to just see it and engage at the same time. So we tend to think about our audience first and work our way back through the platforms, as we said. So, and that's from an ad point of view, we do the same sort of strategy. So again, you'll be thinking, what's the objective we want to run for these campaigns? Let's work our way through the platforms. How are we going to get that best objective through Instagram, through Twitter, through Facebook, with the campaigns that we're going to run, and then the assets that we're going to build into that? How are these assets optimized for each channel? Each one will be different depending on the objective that we're trying to achieve. So we do tend to look at the platforms themselves and understand how to get the most out of them, and the audiences, on what the audiences want on those platforms as well.
And that's I guess that's sort of assuming that the audiences are somewhat similar, like that there are certain demographics that can be found on certain platforms. And I'm wondering if have you seen these shifting at all? Like, for example, I know in I've seen after these new WhatsApp terms of services, I've seen a lot of friends that are now suddenly off WhatsApp and using alternative forms of messengers. And are you how do you adapt to that when these demographics are shifting, and maybe an audience that used to be on a certain platform, they've shifted to another platform which now has different technical specs as well?
Yeah, so it's a real challenge. Trying to find your audiences is obviously the key part of media planning in general. It's how are we going to find the right people to engage with the product and the ad at the right time to complete the objective that we need them to do. And especially with social being such a fluid world, users kind of will jump across depending on trends, depending on, as you've alluded to there, the terms of service on WhatsApp, so mitigating factors like that. It's a real challenge. And trying to stay up to date on those sorts of things is obviously the key. Working with partners to kind of go through surveys, to go through insights on what are the trends in terms of audience retention on these platforms. All those sorts of things are really, really important for understanding how you can plan effectively to reach these audiences and make sure that you're using the platforms in the right way. So, we found a lot of the times that obviously we all know Facebook tends to have a slightly older active user base. And that's kind of just been a trend that we've been seeing over the last few years. But then it's a case of, all right, so how does our content need to adapt to that? Because obviously we can't have the same messages that we run on TikTok and Snapchat as we do on Facebook, where it's a completely different audience demographic. And then suddenly when you're running those messages, are you seeing the results that you want to see? Because that's obviously a key way to understand whether the audience is still on the platform. Are you seeing the results that you're predicting? Are you seeing the right people complete the action? So as much as it is trying to plan ahead and trying to stay up to date with the current trends and being really clued up on where you think it's going to happen, it's also being reactive in the campaign stage of seeing, is it working in the way it's intended? Do we need to change this? Do we need to kind of reevaluate the messaging? Do we need to reevaluate the targeting? So being adaptive is really important, and that's been amplified even more by COVID, and especially in the UK, the changes to restrictions that happen on a regional level rather than just a national level. We're having to be adaptive in different areas of the UK to make sure that our messaging for the audiences that are there, that we've identified, is right for the regional restrictions that are happening at the time.
Right. And with Pin Me Too, that's one thing our software does is lets people target by region. Like they want to say, okay, all these stores in this region, they now have to be closed at this time. So we've certainly seen a lot way more demand for those kind of features since COVID, when companies are having to deal with restrictions that are changing week by week or sometimes day by day. But I want to go back a little bit to when you talked about how you're determining how effective certain campaigns have been, and I just wanted to ask about the insights you're looking at and the stats, because for me, I do some of the social media at Pin Me Too, and we are primarily looking at impressions on LinkedIn. That's like LinkedIn's our big platform, and impressions are our big metric. And I wanted to ask if you have any kind of like personal favorite insights, or if those stats vary really widely based on platform or individual campaign.
Yeah, so we tend to, when we're basing our KPIs and looking at the insights that we want to measure for success and different clients and different brands, it tends to be platform centric. So we will, rather than just having a baseline number of, for example, impressions or video views that we want to achieve across the year or we want to achieve through social, we'll trim it down. And as going back to the usage of the platforms themselves, we'll say, what do we want to achieve from working on that platform? What is it that we want to get out of Facebook, of Twitter, of TikTok, of Snapchat? And from then we'll be able to kind of then identify how we then measure it. So for example, LinkedIn, for example, you're looking at trying to get Pin Me Too's name out there and get awareness of the brand. Impressions is going to be really useful for that. It's showing the amount of people that have seen it and seen who you are. And as you go through, you can then identify other metrics that will help you articulate who's kind of who's sticking with that, and who's kind of really identifying with the brand, and who are the kind of people that you want to then build lookalike audiences off, for example. So we tend to do it platform centric, and we tend to look at my favorites are things like we have active engagements rather than just looking at an engagement rate, and we'd identify active engagements as where someone has taken an action that isn't just a like off as the result of seeing the ad, because liking is quite a passive action. It's you will like, and chances are you'll probably scroll past it at the same time. So have you really engaged and identified the post and identified the brand that you've seen it from? Less so. It's not likely to come back in ad recall in a few days' time, and you're probably unlikely to remember it. But if you've taken the step to comment or click through to the website or share it, you've really identified with what you've seen, and you've kind of decided to put it onto what we call brand me, which is our individual brands, whether it's sharing it to saying I agree with this or I disagree with this, or comment on it, and cognitively think about a response that you want to say to it, even if it's just tagging your friend. You've identified who you think would like this for whatever reason. So those are kind of things that we really like to measure from a content point of view, because it's showing who's really resonating with your brand on an ongoing basis. And you can see that go up and you can see that go down, but you'll ultimately, the numbers are showing that people are having a response that's active to what you're showing them.
Yes, it sounds like a more specific version of sort of what the engagement rate is clumsily measuring. This is that this metric is saying, okay, these people have not only liked it, but actually they've done something that leads you to believe that'll stick in their brain better.
Yeah, definitely. And there's so many things that go into the engagement rate and the engagements number that you see on platforms that can go anything from just like media views all the way through to, as we said, shares and traffic. So it's trying to narrow that down into a number and a metric that you're actually able to kind of say, well, the ad or the content has worked. The content has done what we really wanted them to.
Absolutely. And one more thing here is that Pin Me2 is really focused on is the local messaging, and I wanted to ask you about this division here between what we call brand level messaging, which can be a post from a brand's global page, and then how that differs from the local level. So these posts that come from an individual store's page. And I want to ask how you think about the difference here, and how you decide what kind of things to post at the brand level and what kind of things to post at the local level. And also if you post on it again, if how you tailor that to the platforms.
So I think that's always the big challenge for brands and advertisers, is that difference between global, national, local, how you're trying to kind of get the bigger messages across to a wide group of audience versus the kind of the messages that people, you want to know that a brand is active in your community and is, has a vested interest in the world that you live in around your area. So it's always so important. And we've been trying a lot of working with you guys on local messaging to make sure that audiences feel that brands have a vested interest in the area around them. So whether that's showing what, for example, Subway stores are doing on a local level for their community during lockdown last year, or whether it's just letting them know that they're open and that they're there for them. Those are what we found are really, really important for driving advocacy and driving a kind of a real relevancy to audiences' lives. It has to be obviously balanced with the overall national messaging that you're trying to achieve, whether it's product and prices or new campaigns that are launching. But ultimately, you want people to have seen the bigger campaigns that are running and then feel a bit of a connection with the brand at the local level. And that means that the content kind of is then dictated quite simply in terms of, we're able to then have the national stuff at the beginning that's not local centric, and then bring it all the way down to, okay, right, what have we worked with on a local basis that we can then put into this area and run in this region. And especially during lockdown, that's been, again, dictated by the circumstances that we live in 2021, where we're saying, okay, we need to activate in this area a different set of messaging for these regional restrictions. Here's how we can do that. And again, Pin Me2 has been so useful in doing that, because we're able to make it super clear for audiences which stores are relevant and which pages on Facebook are relevant to them, and making it really simple for people in that area to have a clear user journey.
I think that sums it up pretty nicely. Thank you for being here, Josh.
Awesome. Thanks very much for having me, Evan.